Gracious and loving God, so overrule my words that your words may be heard and being heard, may be believed and being believed, may be lived. Amen.
Amen.
One of the commentaries I read this week started off with the comment that this entire gospel passage is scandalous, is the word they use. Peter calls Jesus the Messiah, and then he tells him not to tell anybody. Then Jesus declares that he must suffer, be rejected, and killed before rising on the third day. Then Jesus rebukes Peter when Peter tries to convince him that he doesn't have to die. And then Jesus delivers his famous teaching about deny yourself and take up the cross and follow him. What are we to make of all this? Let's start with Peter and Jesus. Now, Mark simply says that Peter rebukes Jesus. He does not tell us what Peter says. Matthew is the gospel where we do find that. And in Matthew also, Jesus praises Peter's statement first and calls him the rock. And then a few verses later, Peter says, heaven forbid this must never happen to you. By the way, this is the 6th time Mark mentions Satan, and that is more than in any other Gospels. I got myself thinking about that for the last 2 weeks. Most of the morning prayer readings have been out with the book of Job, and that's one of those places where Satan shows up in the Old Testament. It's prompted me to take a moment and ask, what did Mark and Jesus mean by Satan? Because I think we need to understand that. It is only mentioned in the Hebrew Scriptures in 1 Chronicles, Job, and Zechariah. And each and every time, Satan is a heavenly being who tests, challenges, and most importantly, tempts. For the author of Mark, and I suspect for Jesus, Satan is not synonymous with the devil that most of us picture. The devil we think of is more a product of Renaissance literature and art than it is of sculpture. Richard Rohr wrote this week in one of his reflections on Eastern Orthodox religion, the common view of hell and a quid pro quo God is based not on scripture, but on Dante's Divine Comedy, great poetry, but not good theology. The word hell is not mentioned in the first 5 books of the Bible. Paul and John never used the word. Most of the Eastern Fathers never believed in a literal hell, nor did many Western mystics. So I think it's critical to get our view of Satan as the devil and that out of our mind as we talk about this. Satan, throughout Mark, is a heavenly being who tests and tempts people to turn away from God. He tempts Jesus in the wilderness. It shows up several other times. So what basically Jesus is saying is, Peter, do not tempt me to turn away and avoid what must happen. By this point, I think it's pretty clear in Mark that Jesus knows what his fate will be. I don't know how Jesus felt about this, but I do know that he was clear as to what was going to happen. And from this point on, Jesus sets his eyes clearly on Jerusalem and the end that is coming. This then leads him to rebuke Peter. For Jesus says, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but human things. No. What does he mean by this, and what does this have to do with us? This statement is directly linked then to the teaching about denying yourself and taking up the cross if you wish to follow Jesus. The hint of that is because Jesus immediately goes from his rebuke to Peter into the teaching that I believe is the heart of our gospel passage. For me, this is the essential teaching in today's passage. I again turn to Richard Warren's concept of false self and true self that I've talked about on other occasions. Or as I prefer to think of it, ego-centered self, earthly-centered self, and God-centered self. We all have both of these within us. The ego-centered self is the worldly self, the one that cares what everybody thinks about us, cares about our physical and our basic emotional self. This would be a part that is focused on earthly things that Jesus criticizes in Peter. Now, we all need a good ego-centered self. We all need this self if we're going to function in the world. However, at some point in time, we reach a point where we begin to wonder, is this all there is? There's a longing, a hunger for more than just physical comfort, status, even fame. Don't remember who wrote this, but somewhere I read, and somebody said that we all have a God-shaped hole in us, and only God can fill that hole. There is nothing in the earthly world that can do this, that can satisfy the God-centered self, our true self. This is a time when we should begin to really look at our God-centered self, which is what Thomas Merton first called our true self. This is turning our minds to the heavenly things that Jesus lifts up. By the way, Richard Ward did not invent the concept of false self, true self. It originated with the great Thomas Merton. He's just put it in a little more accessible terms than Merton did. So as I read this section, the question is, what is God asking the self that is God-centered to do? The challenge, the scandal is sometimes this is a difficult choice, one that may involve some sacrifice. Jesus is asking his disciples to do something very difficult, but one that will ultimately have a great reward. Now make no mistake, I am not talking about the prosperity gospel. I'm not talking about monetary gains, physical comfort. Those are all products of the ego self, and they themselves are not bad. In fact, they are incredibly good if they enable each of us to help our true self develop and become a true disciple of Jesus. Jesus in this passage is not some meek and mild and good buddy. I think back to one movie where they have the buddy Christ, the nice friendly Jesus that everybody wants to invite into the church. Come on, it will all be hugs and everything. No, this is not the Jesus we're getting to mark right here, is it? This is one that wants us to think about the heavenly things, that get us to look outside of ourselves and out towards others. Heavenly things happen when we love God and love our neighbor. Ultimately, we, you, I, and everybody all need to sit in prayer, however you choose to do that, and ask, what does it mean for us to deny ourselves, our ego self, and pick up our cross and have our true selves truly follow Jesus? What does it mean to live into and follow our true self, our God-centered self in today's world? I cannot begin to tell you what it is for you. But there is someone who can answer that question. And there's an old hymn out there, back in the old hymn that's been around a long time, that has the line, "Take it to the Lord in prayer." So what I ask you is to ask God, take it to the Lord. What are you calling me to deny so that I may pick up my cross and follow your Son in his saving work